The wealthy daughter, with a heart of stone and a mind sharpened by greed, watched her elderly mother. There was no love, only a burden, an obstacle to the inheritance she so coveted. With calculating coldness, she tied the fragile old woman onto the back of an old donkey whose tired eyes mirrored resignation. The plan was simple, cruel, and in her twisted mind, perfect. To stage an accident. At the edge of the bridge, over the dark and turbulent waters, the daughter pushed the animal. The donkey, with the mother tied to it, plummeted into the void, a fall that should have been fatal, an end orchestrated by nature to conceal human malice. But fate, at times, has its own guardians. In a flash of white and dark stripes, a majestic albino tiger appeared from nowhere. With impossible agility, the beast intercepted the fall, landing in the water with controlled force that cushioned the impact. It was not a predator, but a savior. The tiger, with its imposing presence, protected the elderly woman and the little donkey, keeping them safe from the icy waters and certain death. The daughter's cruelty was confronted by wild grace, and life, which should have been extinguished, was guarded by the most unexpected of beasts. The cold morning air whipped the daughter's face, but it was shock, not the wind, that paralyzed her at the edge of the bridge. Her eyes, once cold and calculating, now wide with disbelief, fixed on the scene below. What she had just witnessed defied all logic, all reality. The donkey, her mother tied to it, the fatal fall. Everything should have ended there, in the dark waters, a secret carried away by the current. But no. Instead of the brutal impact, the final scream, there was the impossible. A flash of white, dark stripes, a creature of legends, not of flesh and blood, had intercepted death. The albino tiger, majestic and unreal, kept the elderly woman and the little donkey afloat, its powerful body cushioning the shock of the fall. It wasn't a rescue, it was a miracle, and for the daughter, it was hell. Her meticulously orchestrated plan crumbled before her eyes like a house of cards. Panic began to set in, a cold, nauseating wave rising from her stomach to her throat. What would she do now? Her mother was alive, the animal was alive, and the tiger seemed to look up at her with eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. Down below in the turbulent waters, the mother slowly awoke from a shock-induced stupor. The pain was a distant hum, the cold, a constant sting. But there was something else, something warm and soft against her back, a steady rhythm of breathing. Her eyes, cloudy and heavy, opened to a blur of white and black. It wasn't the darkness of death, nor the coldness of the river that awaited. It was the dense, immaculate fur of a tiger, an albino tiger, at first terror, a predator. But the creature didn't attack her. Instead, it held her, along with the donkey, with surprising gentleness, floating on the surface. The animal's head, large and imposing, was turned towards the bridge, its amber eyes fixed on a distant point, as if standing guard. The elderly woman, tied to the donkey's back, felt the animal tremble beneath her, a mix of fear and exhaustion. She was alive, and a tiger was saving her. The fragile mind of the old woman, still confused, tried to process the surreal image, her, the donkey, and the striped guardian, adrift in the icy waters. On the bridge, the daughter couldn't move. Her mind, once so sharp, now spun in a whirlwind of catastrophic scenarios. Her mother had survived, and with her, proof of her attempted murder. The tiger, a completely unforeseen element, was a silent and terrifying witness. She needed to act, and fast. The sun began to peek through the clouds, threatening to illuminate the scene and bring with it the possibility of other eyes. The river, which should have been her accomplice, was now the stage of her failure. Her eyes swept across the landscape. The bridge was high, the banks distant and densely wooded. No one seemed to have witnessed what happened, but how long would this luck last? The tiger, with the mother and the donkey, began to move slowly against the current, as if looking for a landing spot. The daughter felt a chill run down her spine. If her mother reached the bank, if she was found, if she spoke, everything would be lost. The inheritance, her reputation, her freedom. A new wave of fury, even more intense than the panic, overwhelmed her. There was no room for remorse, only for the brutal need to correct the mistake. She could not allow her mother to live, not after this. What was a simple accident plan now transformed into a desperate race against time. She had to finish what she started. Her eyes, once wide, now narrowed with a renewed and even darker determination. The tiger might have saved her mother from the fall, but the real danger still lurked. Not in the depths of the river, but on the surface of the bridge, in the twisted mind of her own daughter. The elderly woman, feeling the tiger's gentle movement, raised her head with difficulty. The animal, with surprising strength, was swimming, pushing the donkey and herself towards one of the banks. With each powerful stroke, hope, once crushed by terror, began to sprout. But hope came with a disturbing question: why? Why a tiger? And more importantly, what would happen when they reached dry land? Would the savior become the predator? Or was the greater threat still up there, on the bridge, watching every move? The tension in the air was palpable, the silence of nature broken only by the sound of the water and the accelerated beating of hearts. The story was far from over. At the edge of the bridge, the cold morning air was no match for the chill running down the daughter's spine. Her eyes, once fixed on the surreal scene below, now swept the landscape with feverish urgency. The albino tiger, a powerful white blur against the dark green of the riverside vegetation, moved with unexpected grace, pushing the donkey and her mother towards the bank. Each stroke of the animal was a blow to her plan, a hammer blow to her facade of innocence. The panic, once a cold wave, was now a tsunami of adrenaline and fury. Her mother was alive. Her mother had seen her. And the tiger. The tiger was an impossible witness, a mystical guardian who had subverted the natural order of things. She needed to act, and fast. The sun, a golden, inquisitive eye, began to peek through the clouds, threatening to illuminate the scene and bring with it the possibility of other eyes. The bridge, once her vantage point, now seemed like a trap, a pedestal from which she observed her failure. Her eyes narrowed. Her calculating mind, though shaken, began to function again, seeking a new route, a new plan to correct the error. There was no room for remorse, only for the brutal need to finish what she started. The inheritance, her reputation, her freedom. Everything depended on her ability to silence her mother, to erase the existence of that animal and, if possible, to make the tiger disappear. She turned abruptly, her steps echoing on the metal and concrete structure. She couldn't descend the bridge. It was too high and exposed. She needed a vehicle, something to take her quickly to the bank, where her mother and the donkey, exhausted and soaked, would be vulnerable. Her car, a luxury SUV, was parked a few hundred yards away, hidden among some trees to avoid suspicion. She ran, the wind whipping her hair, the sound of her own shoes on the road muffling the turmoil in her mind. Every meter covered was a countdown. Her mother could not reach dry land and speak. She could not. Down below, in the turbulent waters, the elderly woman felt the tiger's body against her back, a source of warmth and strength amidst the biting cold. The donkey beneath her trembled but stayed afloat, propelled by the beast. The old woman's mind, previously clouded by shock and age, began to clear, revealing the sharp image of her daughter's face, devoid of any emotion, pushing them into the abyss. The betrayal was a poison that burned more than the icy water. But there was also gratitude, an overwhelming feeling for the striped creature that was saving her. The tiger swam with silent power, its hind legs propelling it with vigor. its front paws cutting through the water with precision, its amber eyes, once fixed on the bridge, now focused on the bank, where dense vegetation promised refuge. It was not a predator seeking prey, but a guardian, a protector. With each stroke, the distance to land diminished, and with it, the old woman's hope grew. But hope came with a disturbing question. Why? Why a tiger? And more importantly, what would happen when they reached dry land? Would the savior become the predator? Or was the greater threat still up there on the bridge, watching every move? The water under the tiger's paws became shallower. With a final effort, the beast pushed the donkey and the elderly woman onto the soft mud of the bank. The striped animal, with its pure, white, immaculate coat, emerged from the water like a vision, its muscles tense and powerful. The elderly woman, still tied to the donkey's back, felt the gentle impact as the donkey touched solid ground. The cold was excruciating, the exhaustion total. She tried to move, but her limbs were numb. The rope tightened. The donkey, gasping, struggled to stand, its legs wobbly. The tiger, for its part, showed no signs of tiredness. It turned, its eyes fixed on the elderly woman and the donkey. There was no aggression, only calm vigilance. It seemed to wait, as if its mission was not yet complete. The old woman, her voice hoarse and weak, murmured, "Thank you." The sound barely left her lips, but the tiger seemed to register it. It approached, not with the intention to attack, but with an almost human curiosity. Its amber eyes, deep and intelligent, met the old woman's, as if seeking an answer, or perhaps offering a silent promise. Meanwhile, the daughter, her heart pounding uncontrollably, reached her car. The key turned in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a violent sound that seemed to echo her own fury. She shifted into gear, the tire squealing on the asphalt as she took a sharp turn, driving at high speed along the road parallel to the river. Her eyes, now cold and determined, swept the bank, searching for any sign of her mother, the donkey, the tiger. Adrenaline propelled her, transforming fear into a chilling resolve. There would be no more failures. There would be no more witnesses. The elderly woman on the bank felt the donkey's body tremble. The tiger beside her looked like a statue of marble and muscle, its presence imposing and protective. But the feeling of safety was fragile. She was tied, vulnerable, and knew that the real danger had not passed. The distant sound of an approaching engine began to be heard, a low hum that quickly transformed into a roar. Her eyes, previously fixed on the tiger, now widened in terror. She knew who was coming, her daughter, and this time she would come to finish the job. The tiger, sensing the change in the atmosphere, turned its head abruptly, its eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. The tension in the air was palpable, the silence of nature broken only by the approaching engine and the accelerated beating of hearts. The story was far from over, and the next chapter promised to be even darker. The roar of the daughter's SUV engine tore through the morning silence, a distorted hymn to her fury and desperation. The tire squealed again as she forced the car into a sharp turn, the suspension groaning in protest. Her eyes, once wide with panic, were now narrow and hard, sweeping the riverbank with feverish intensity. Every meter covered was a countdown, a race against time and against nature itself that dared to defy her plans. The image of her mother, tied to the donkey, floating in the waters with that albino monster, burned in her retina, fueling a chilling resolve. There was no more room for fear, only for the brutal need to correct the mistake, the inheritance, her reputation, her freedom. Everything depended on her ability to silence her mother, to erase the existence of that animal, and, if possible, to make the tiger disappear. She accelerated, the landscape blurring past the windows. The dirt road parallel to the river was uneven, but she didn't care. The car bounced and skidded, but she maintained control with terrifying precision. Her initial plan, so simple and elegant, had dissolved into a chaos of impossible events. But she was not one to give up. Failure was not an option. If her mother spoke, if she was found, if that tiger were a witness, the life she had meticulously built would crumble. And that she could not allow. Down below, on the muddy bank, the elderly woman felt the donkey's body tremble beneath her. The cold was excruciating, but the terror that invaded her was even more paralyzing. The sound of the engine approached, growing in volume, transforming from a distant hum into a deafening roar. She knew who was coming. Her daughter's face, devoid of any emotion as she pushed her into the abyss, reappeared in her mind with painful clarity. The betrayal was a poison that burned more than the icy water. And now her daughter was coming to finish the job. The tiger beside her looked like a statue of marble and muscle, its presence imposing and protective, but the feeling of safety was fragile. She was tied, vulnerable, an easy target. Her eyes, previously fixed on the tiger, now widened in terror, sweeping the road above from where the sound came. The striped animal, sensing the change in the atmosphere, turned its head abruptly, its amber eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. There was no hesitation in its demeanor, only calm, but intensified vigilance. Its muscles tensed, every hair on its white coat seeming to vibrate with the approaching threat. The SUV suddenly appeared, breaking through the tree line, its headlights cutting through the morning gloom. The daughter braked abruptly, the car skidding on the loose earth, raising a cloud of dust. Her eyes, from behind the dirty windshield, met the scene below. Her mother, the donkey, and the tiger. A sight that should have been impossible, but which was there, real and defiant. A new wave of fury overwhelmed her, mixed with a pang of disbelief. How? How had they survived? And the tiger. It was still there, an imposing guardian, blocking her path. The daughter swallowed hard, but her determination did not waver. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The distance between them was only a few dozen meters, but the terrain was uneven, soaked by the previous night's rain and the proximity of the river. She couldn't simply run them over. The car would get stuck and she would be exposed. She needed a plan, and fast. The tiger, for its part, did not wait. With a fluid, silent movement, it positioned itself between the elderly woman and the SUV. Its amber eyes fixed on the daughter, a gleam of intelligence and warning in them. It let out a low, deep growl that reverberated in the air, a primordial sound that made the hair on the back of the daughter's neck stand on end. It was not the growl of a hungry predator, but of a protector marking its territory. The elderly woman, feeling the growl vibrate in the air, felt a shiver run down her spine. But this time, it was not out of fear of the tiger, but rather a strange sense of security. The creature was protecting her. She raised her head with difficulty, her eyes fixed on her daughter, who was now stopped in the car, watching them. The hatred in the daughter's eyes was unmistakable, a cold and relentless flame. The daughter, in the car, felt the impact of the growl in her chest. The tiger was larger than she remembered, more imposing. Its eyes, almost human in their intensity, were evaluating her. She was not stupid. She knew that confronting an enraged albino tiger, especially one that seemed to have its own agenda, was suicide. But she also knew she couldn't just leave. She turned off the engine. The silence that followed even more oppressive. The tiger did not move, maintaining its defensive position. The elderly woman, tied to the donkey, watched the scene, her heart beating erratically. The daughter opened the SUV door, but did not get out. She just watched, her eyes narrowed, calculating. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with imminent threat. The sun, now higher, began to illuminate the scene, revealing every detail of the tiger's white coat, the old woman's pale face, the mud on the riverbank. The daughter needed a weapon, something that could neutralize the beast, or at least drive it away long enough for her to reach her mother. Her eyes swept the car's interior, searching for something, anything. A pocket knife, a jack, nothing that could stop a tiger. Her gaze returned to the scene. The tiger seemed in no hurry. It was there, a living, insurmountable barrier. The elderly woman, for her part, seemed more fragile than ever, but her eyes, though tired, held a new spark of defiance. Time was running out. Other people could pass by on the road at any moment. She couldn't afford to wait. But what to do? The tiger was a force of nature, an obstacle she hadn't foreseen and for which she had no solution. The daughter clenched her fists, frustration and rage boiling within her. She had to finish what she started. But how? The tiger, with its majestic and threatening presence, was the guardian of a secret she desperately needed to bury. The story was far from over, and the next chapter promised to be an even more desperate confrontation. The daughter, trapped inside the SUV, felt time slipping away like sand through her fingers. The image of her mother and the donkey, protected by that white monster, was a living nightmare, an affront to her intelligence and her meticulous cruelty. Her eyes swept the car's interior with feverish urgency, searching for something, anything, that could turn the tide. A pocket knife, useless against a beast of that size. A car jack, too heavy, too slow. Only an albino tiger, a mythical creature that should only exist in legends, could have thwarted such a perfect, so carefully orchestrated plan. Rage consumed her, a cold flame threatening to explode, mixed with the growing panic of exposure. She needed a solution, and fast. The sun was rising on the horizon, and with it the possibility of witnesses. The road, though isolated, was not completely deserted. If someone saw her there, with her mother tied up and an albino tiger, the narrative would be impossible to control. Her life, her fortune, her reputation, her freedom. Everything would disintegrate. Failure was not an option. With a muffled cry of frustration, she slammed the steering wheel. There were no conventional weapons, no time to think of complex strategies. The only weapon she had at that moment was the car itself. An insane idea, but madness had already set in, corroding her reason. She started the engine again, the violent roar cutting through the tense morning silence. The tiger, which until then had maintained a defensive posture, lowered its head, a deeper, more threatening growl escaping its throat. Its amber eyes fixed on the SUV, every muscle in its body tensed, ready for attack or defense, a living statue of power and alertness. The daughter shifted into gear, the tire squealing in the mud as she forced the car forward towards the bank. Not to run them over, not directly, but to intimidate, to clear a path, to drive the beast away. The SUV advanced, slow and clumsy on the uneven terrain, but with a clear intent, a metallic, noisy threat. The tiger, however, did not retreat. With surprising agility for its size, it made a lateral leap, positioning itself even more firmly between the car and the elderly woman. Its growl transformed into a guttural roar, a sound that seemed to tear the very air, a primordial warning that echoed through the landscape. The elderly woman, tied to the donkey, felt the ground vibrate with the force of that sound. Terror consumed her again, but this time it wasn't from the white beast. It was from the imminent danger her own daughter represented, a much more intimate and painful threat. She closed her eyes, praying for a miracle or for a quick end, anything to stop the agony. The frightened donkey tried to struggle, its legs wobbly in the mud, but exhaustion prevented any effective movement. The daughter braked abruptly, the SUV stopping a few meters from the tiger. The striped animal did not waver. Its eyes, now incandescent, showed no fear, only an iron determination, an unshakable will to protect. The daughter realized the car wouldn't be enough. The tiger was no ordinary animal. It was a guardian, a force of nature that could not be intimidated by metal and noise. Frustration turned into desperation, and desperation demanded action. She needed something more. Her eyes landed on a gardening shovel in the back seat, forgotten from a day of work in the mansion garden. It wasn't an ideal weapon, but it was something, anything. With a swift movement, she grabbed it, the cold, heavy metal blade in her trembling hands. Opening the car door, she stepped out, the shovel raised like a primitive weapon, an extension of her fury. Her feet sank into the mud, but she didn't care. The hatred in her eyes was palpable, a blind rage that propelled her, disfiguring her face. "Get out of the way!" she screamed, her voice hoarse and distorted by desperation, almost a lament. The tiger watched her, motionless, its eyes following her every move with terrifying precision. It did not attack, did not retreat. It merely held its position, a living wall between the daughter and her mother, a silent and imposing guardian. The elderly woman, seeing her daughter approach with the shovel, felt a chill run down her spine. That was not her daughter's face. It was the face of a killer, devoid of any humanity, a mask of hatred and determination. The betrayal was a poison that consumed her, more painful than the cold and exhaustion. The daughter took another step, the shovel raised, ready to strike. The tiger then let out one last growl, more a warning than a threat. But this time, there was a subtle difference. Its eyes momentarily shifted, not to the daughter, but to the road above, from where a new sound, faint and distant, began to be heard. A sound different from the SUV's engine, a sound of something lighter, perhaps a smaller vehicle, or even human footsteps approaching. The daughter, blinded by fury, did not notice the change in the tiger's attention. She advanced, the shovel ready to strike. The tiger, however, had registered the new threat. It could not protect the elderly woman and the donkey from two sides at once. The tension reached its peak. The confrontation was about to explode, but the universe seemed to have other plans, and time, suddenly, was running out for everyone. The shovel, raised like an appendage of her own fury, descended in a wild arc, tearing through the humid air. The daughter, blinded by rage, no longer saw the tiger as a living creature, but as an obstacle, a barrier to be knocked down. Her bloodshot eyes fixed on the target, ignoring the imminent danger. Her instinct for self-preservation drowned in a sea of desperation and hatred. Her feet sank into the mud with each step, but she advanced, driven by a primal need to finish what she had started. The tiger, for its part, was not blind. Its amber eyes, which moments before had shifted to the road, now fixed on the immediate threat. It did not retreat. Instead, its majestic body tensed, every muscle taut, ready to intercept the blow. There was no fear in its gaze, only a calculated assessment of the danger and an unshakable determination to protect. The growl that escaped its throat was deeper, more guttural, a final warning before the inevitable collision. The elderly woman, tied to the donkey, watched the scene, her heart pounding erratically. The image of her daughter, disfigured by fury, brandishing the shovel, was a nightmare materializing before her eyes. She felt a chill run down her spine, a terror that surpassed the fear of death. It was the pain of betrayal, of losing her own flesh and blood. But amidst the panic, she noticed the subtle change in the tiger's behavior, the way its eyes shifted, the tension in its body that seemed to divide between two threats. And then she also heard, faint at first, a distant hum that grew in intensity. It wasn't the sound of a passenger car, nor the heavy engine of a truck. It was something lighter, more agile, an engine that seemed to cut through the air with its own urgency. A sound that the daughter, in her blindness of fury, had not yet registered. The shovel was centimeters from the tiger's head when the animal acted, not with a frontal attack, but with a surprising body movement. It rotated, presenting its flank, and with a quick, powerful blow of its front paw, struck the shovel. The metal resonated with a sharp clang, and the force of the impact sent the tool flying from the daughter's hands, describing an arc in the air before falling into the mud with a dull thud. The daughter staggered back, her hand tingling, her mind stunned by the speed and precision of the counterattack. For an instant, she was paralyzed, her fury replaced by a chilling shock. The tiger did not attack her, it merely watched her, its eyes fixed, but with a new urgency. And it was in that moment of forced silence that the sound became unmistakable. It was the roar of a motorcycle, and it was no longer distant. The sound now reverberated clearly, coming from the bend in the road just above the riverbank. The daughter finally heard it. The icy panic that had been contained by rage exploded within her. Witnesses. The word echoed in her mind like an alarm bell. The perfect plan, the silent death, everything was about to crumble. The tiger, noticing the shift in the daughter's attention, seized the opportunity. It did not move, but its eyes fixed on the bend in the road, its posture still defensive, but now divided. It knew that the danger did not come only from the woman in front of it. The elderly woman, for her part, felt a pang of hope. Fragile as a flickering flame, someone was coming, someone would see, but hope came with a new terror. What would her daughter do now? Caught red-handed, with her mother tied to the donkey and an albino tiger as guardian, the situation was untenable. The motorcycle appeared around the bend, a dark silhouette against the morning sun. It was a dirt bike, ridden by a man wearing a helmet and adventure gear. He slowed down as he spotted the SUV oddly parked on the riverbank, and then his eyes landed on the surreal scene. A woman in expensive clothes, muddy, without a shovel, facing an albino tiger that was protecting an elderly woman tied to a donkey. The motorcyclist braked sharply, the rear tire skidding in the mud. The bike's engine coughed and died, leaving an abrupt, heavy silence. The man, still wearing his helmet, dismounted, disbelief etched in his posture. He didn't need words to understand that something terribly wrong was happening. The daughter, her face pale and eyes wide, looked at the motorcyclist, then at the tiger, and finally at her mother. Time had run out. The meticulous cruelty had been exposed. There was no longer any way to hide the crime. Panic completely overwhelmed her, and in a last, desperate act of self-preservation, she ran. Not to the car, not to her mother, but towards the riverbank, in the opposite direction from the motorcyclist, seeking an impossible escape, a refuge that did not exist. The tiger, with a low growl, watched the daughter's escape. Its attention, for a brief moment, was divided between the running woman and the cautiously approaching motorcyclist. But its protective instinct prevailed. It maintained its position, a living wall between the elderly woman and the stranger who was now approaching, its amber eyes evaluating the new variable, ready to defend its charge from any threat, be it human or wild. The story was far from over, and the next chapter promised to be an even more desperate confrontation, now with the presence of an unexpected witness. Panic, a wild and irrational beast, had taken hold of the daughter. She ran, not with a plan, but with the blind instinct of a cornered animal. Her feet, once clad in designer shoes, now sank into the cold, sticky mud of the riverbank, each step a struggle against nature and against the very reality that was unraveling around her. She didn't look back, didn't see the approaching motorcyclist, nor the tiger watching her with an almost supernatural intensity. Her mind was blank, save for a single deafening word: witnesses. But the riverbank offered no escape. The dense, thorny vegetation, the dark, icy river water, all rose as an insurmountable barrier. In a few meters, she stopped, gasping, her heart pounding against her ribs. The cold air burned her lungs. She turned, eyes wide, and the scene unfolding before her was a nightmare. The motorcyclist, now a few meters away, had already removed his helmet, revealing a bearded, surprised face. His wide eyes alternated between the tied elderly woman, the frightened donkey, and the albino tiger, a sight that defied all logic. The daughter realized with brutal clarity that there was nowhere to run. The meticulous plan, the accident charade, Everything had crumbled, and amidst this desperate revelation, a new and terrible idea began to form in her twisted mind. If she couldn't escape, if she would be caught, then let it be for a consummated crime. Let her mother die, no matter the cost. The hatred which had been momentarily supplanted by panic resurfaced with renewed force, fiercer and more determined than ever. The motorcyclist, a middle-aged man named João, had set out for his usual morning trail ride. What he found, however, was far beyond any adventure he could have imagined. He saw the woman, muddy and with a wild look, and the tiger. Ah, the tiger. It was a creature of legends, and it was there, real, majestic, protecting a helpless old woman. He raised his hands in a gesture of appeasement, trying to show he posed no threat. "Is everything all right?" he shouted, his voice choked with disbelief and concern. "Do you need help?" The tiger, for its part, did not avert its gaze. Its amber eyes, which had previously divided between the daughter and the stranger, now fixed on João. It did not growl, did not attack. It merely maintained its position, a living barrier, its muscles tensed, ready for any movement. It was a guardian, and its priority was clear: the elderly woman and the donkey. The elderly woman, tied to the donkey, felt a wave of relief upon seeing João, a witness, a chance. But hope was quickly replaced by an icy terror when she saw her daughter's gaze. That was not the look of someone who had given up. It was the look of someone about to commit a final, desperate act. She tried to scream, to warn João, but her voice was caught in her throat, choked by fear and exhaustion. The daughter, with cold, calculating determination, ignored the motorcyclist, her eyes fixed on the donkey and her mother. The bridge. She needed to get them to the bridge. With a guttural cry, more a roar of desperation than a word, she turned and ran back, not to the car, but to the donkey. Her mind had devised a new and terrible plan. If she couldn't push them from the bank, she would push them from the bridge. The tiger reacted instantly. Its body moved with surprising speed, turning to intercept the daughter. But the woman, in her blind fury, didn't care about the danger. She had found an opening, a path to the donkey that the tiger, focused on the motorcyclist, had not completely blocked. She brushed past the animal's flank, her hand extended not to attack, but to grab the donkey's rein. The already terrified donkey felt the abrupt tug. It brayed, trying to struggle, but the daughter, with an insane strength born of desperation, began to pull it. The mud made movement difficult, but she didn't give up. Her objective was clear: the access ramp to the bridge, just a few meters away. João, the motorcyclist, watched the scene with horror. He had seen the woman, now with a gardening shovel in hand, try to attack the tiger, and now she was dragging the donkey with the elderly woman tied to it towards the bridge. "Stop!" he shouted, running to help, but the muddy terrain and the distance slowed him down. The tiger, sensing the new direct threat to its charge, let out a furious growl and lunged towards the daughter, but she had already gained a few meters advantage. With a final, violent tug, the daughter managed to drag the donkey onto the access ramp. The animal's hooves slipped on the damp earth, but it was forced to climb. The elderly woman, swaying dangerously, felt the donkey stumble. She closed her eyes, knowing what was coming. The bridge. The daughter, now at the bridge entrance, did not hesitate. She pushed the donkey with all her might, a cry of triumph and desperation escaping her lips. The animal, exhausted and terrified, could not resist. Its hind legs slipped on the edge of the bridge, and with a bray of pure terror, it began to fall. The elderly woman, tied to it, felt the void beneath her feet, the icy wind on her face, the sound of the water approaching. But the tiger was faster than gravity. In an impossible leap, an explosion of muscle and agility, it launched itself from the bank. its amber eyes fixed on the donkey and the elderly woman, its white striped body cutting through the air like a projectile. It wasn't aiming for the bridge, but the exact point where the donkey would hit the water. There was no time to think, only to act. It was the last hope, the last barrier between life and death, a force of nature defying fate. The impact with the water would be brutal, but it was ready. The fall, the betrayal, the desperation, everything would culminate there. In the icy embrace of the river, time in that instant seemed to stretch and break. The daughter's desperate scream, the donkey's terrified bray, the biting wind, all were swallowed by the tiger's impossible leap. It was not an animal, but a primordial force, an explosion of life and instinct. Its white body, striped like lightning in the darkness, traced a perfect arc in the air, not towards the bridge, but to the exact point where gravity would do its cruel work. Its amber eyes, fixed, saw no danger, only the need to protect. The impact was thunder. Not the dry sound of a body hitting the water, but a controlled explosion, a calculated dive. The tiger, with a mastery that defied logic, hit the surface seconds before the donkey. Its massive, muscular body, instead of sinking, used the force of the fall to create a barrier, a cushion of water and muscle. The already panicked donkey fell onto the tiger, not directly into the water. The shock was still brutal, but the force of the blow was absorbed, dissipated. The elderly woman, tied to it, felt the impact like a punch to the stomach, but not the crushing she expected. A gigantic wave rose, engulfing the three in a whirlwind of foam and icy water. The aquatic darkness was instantaneous, a cold, suffocating embrace. The elderly woman, her lungs full of air, felt the donkey struggle, the rope tightening around her even more. She was disoriented, not knowing which way was the surface, which way was the bottom. Panic threatened to consume the last shred of lucidity, but then she felt it, a powerful underwater force guiding the donkey, pushing it upwards. It wasn't a desperate struggle, but a deliberate, strong and constant movement. The tiger, even underwater, maintained its purpose. It used its body to stabilize the donkey, to propel it towards the light. In an instant that seemed an eternity, they emerged. The elderly woman gasped, coughing up the water that had invaded her nostrils, her eyes burning. The donkey brayed, choking, its legs moving awkwardly in the icy water, and the majestic tiger was there. Its white head, now wet and gleaming, hovered above the surface, its amber eyes sweeping the bank, assessing the new situation. It wasn't swimming beside them, it was with them, a point of support, a living anchor in the middle of the current. It kept the donkey close, using its body to help the animal float, to orient itself. The elderly woman, still tied, felt the warmth of the tiger's body, a solid and protective presence that defied all her understanding. High on the bridge, the daughter watched. Her eyes, once filled with blind fury, were now wide with shock and disbelief. The plan, the final act, had failed. Again. The tiger. That impossible creature had defied death, gravity, and nature itself. A cry of pure frustration and hatred escaped her lips, a hoarse, animalistic sound that was lost in the river's echo. She couldn't believe it. Her mother was alive, and that animal, that white demon, was responsible. A new wave of rage, colder and more calculating, began to boil within her. There was no longer any way to stage an accident. Now, it was a matter of survival, of eliminating the witnesses, of ensuring no one ever knew. João, the motorcyclist, had run to the edge of the bridge, in time to see the tiger's leap and the impact in the water. His heart pounded uncontrollably. He had witnessed something that defied reason, a scene he would never forget. The relief of seeing the elderly woman and the donkey emerge was immense, but the situation was still desperate. They were in the middle of the river, the current seemed strong, and the woman on the bridge. She seemed completely insane. He needed to act. Looking at the daughter's SUV, he saw her cell phone on the passenger seat, the door open. The police. He needed to call the police, but how would he reach them in the river? The river, once a mere backdrop for the crime, now became a character. Its dark, icy waters were a new challenge, a new threat. The current, though not a whirlpool, was strong enough to drag the donkey and the elderly woman away to a more dangerous part, perhaps to submerged rocks or branches. The cold began to numb the old woman's limbs, and the donkey, though a good swimmer by nature, was exhausted and terrified. The tiger, however, seemed in its element. It moved with surprising grace, using the force of the current to its advantage, guiding the donkey and the elderly woman to the nearest bank, where the water seemed calmer and shallower. It would not abandon them. It was their salvation, their compass amidst the chaos. With each stroke of the donkey, with each movement of the tiger, the old woman's hope grew, but the fear of her daughter, who was still on the bridge, was a persistent shadow. She knew her daughter would not give up. Not now. Joanne's presence was a blessing, but also a new target for the daughter's fury. The story had transformed from a secret crime into an open confrontation, and the river, with its treacherous waters, was the stage for the next act of a drama that refused to end. The tiger, the donkey, and the elderly woman, now united by the icy water, fought not only against nature, but against the relentless cruelty of a daughter who had completely lost her reason. The tiger, the donkey, and the elderly woman, now united by the icy water, fought not only against nature, but against the relentless cruelty of a daughter who had completely lost her reason. The current, an invisible and powerful embrace, pulled them with insistent force. The cold, a silent and treacherous enemy, began to numb the old woman's limbs, robbing her of sensation, of the ability to react. Every drop of water that ran down her face was a chilling reminder of her vulnerability, of her dependence on that wild creature. The donkey, exhausted and terrified, struggled. Its legs moved at a frantic but uncoordinated pace, a desperate fight against the element that swallowed it. It brayed, a muffled, agonizing sound that was lost in the vastness of the river. The rope that bound it to the elderly woman, once a symbol of her imprisonment, was now the only connection between them, a fragile link in the aquatic immensity. The elderly woman, her mouth full of the bitter taste of panic and river water, felt the animal's body tremble beneath her. The fear that the donkey would succumb to exhaustion was almost as great as the fear of her daughter. But the tiger, oh, the tiger! It was the very personification of strength and determination. Its movements were fluid, powerful, each stroke calculated, each impulse an act of will. It did not swim beside them. It was one with them, an unshakable point of support. Its massive body, now submerged and re-emerging at a steady rhythm, acted as a rudder, guiding the donkey, pushing it towards the nearest bank. Its amber eyes, even wet, maintained an intense gleam, a constant vigilance that swept the water's surface and the banks as if searching for new threats. It was the compass, the anchor, the hope amidst the icy chaos. The elderly woman, despite the cold and fear, felt a strange calm emanate from that powerful body. It was the calm of one who knew she was being protected by something greater than life itself. High on the bridge, the daughter was a figure distorted by fury. Her eyes, once wide with shock, now burned with a maniacal intensity. The cry of frustration had transformed into a contained growl, a sound that barely escaped her tense lips. The failure of her plan had not broken her, it had only deepened her madness. She no longer saw her mother, the donkey, or the tiger as living beings, but as obstacles, pieces in a perverse game. She was determined to win. The idea of staging an accident had been abandoned. Now it was a hunt, a brutal hunt with no witnesses. Her eyes swept the bridge, the bank, the car. The SUV, with its door still open, was an invitation. She ran to it, not to flee, but to retrieve. Her mind, a whirlwind of hatred and desperation, worked at terrifying speed, seeking a new tool, a new weapon. She could no longer push them. She needed to eliminate them. Inside the car, among the objects of a life of luxury and contempt, her fingers found what they were looking for. A heavy toolbox, forgotten in the trunk, and beside it, a can of gasoline for the lawnmower, an ironic reminder of a life she now wanted to erase. A cruel and distorted smile formed on her lips. João, the motorcyclist, had approached the edge of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the surreal scene unfolding in the river. The initial relief of seeing the elderly woman and the donkey emerge was quickly replaced by renewed terror as he saw the daughter run to the car. He felt in his bones that she had not given up. His eyes quickly located her cell phone on the passenger seat. The police. He needed to call the police, but time was crucial. Every second was an eternity. He hesitated. Running for the cell phone meant turning his back on the daughter, risking interception. But doing nothing meant condemning the elderly woman and the animal. The decision was made in a flash. He turned, running towards the SUV, his feet slipping on the muddy access ramp. He could hear the creak of the toolbox being opened, the hollow sound of the gasoline can being handled. A shiver ran down his spine. She wasn't just looking for a weapon, she was looking for something to destroy. In the river, the elderly woman felt the donkey stumble. The cold was becoming unbearable, her muscles stiff, her breathing shallow. But the tiger was there, a wall of warmth and strength. It pushed them, guided them, its movements precise and powerful. The bank, once a distant mirage, began to materialize, a blur of green and brown. Hope, a thin thread, began to strengthen. But then, a sound. Not the sound of the water, nor the bray of the donkey, a sound coming from above, a metallic sound, followed by a dull thud. The elderly woman, with difficulty, raised her head. High on the bridge, the figure of the daughter stood out against the grey sky, and in her hands something gleamed, something she was about to throw. João had reached the SUV. His fingers were already extended for the cell phone, but he froze. He saw the daughter on the bridge railing with a heavy metallic object in one hand and the can of gasoline in the other. Their eyes met for an instant, and João saw there not just hatred, but a cold, calculating madness. She wasn't just trying to kill, she was trying to obliterate. A cry of warning escaped João's throat, but it was too late. With an animalistic roar, the daughter raised the gasoline can. The flammable liquid began to gush onto the water, forming a dark, oily slick that spread rapidly towards the donkey, the elderly woman, and the tiger. And then, with an abrupt movement, she threw the metallic object, which hit the water's surface with a violent splash a few meters from the gasoline slick. It wasn't a stone. It was something that could generate a spark. The acrid smell of gasoline hit the elderly woman's nostrils. She coughed, her eyes burning. The donkey brayed, agitated. The tiger, sensing the new and terrible threat, let out a deep growl, a sound that reverberated through the water, a warning, a promise of retaliation. It was not just a protector. It was a force of nature that would not be challenged with impunity. The bank was so close, but the danger now was imminent and fiery. The daughter had lit a new hell, and the river, once a refuge, threatened to become a pyre. The acrid smell of gasoline, once merely an olfactory threat, now intensified, burning the old woman's nostrils, a foretaste of hell. The dark, oily slick danced on the water's surface, a distorted mirror of the grey sky, but with a promise of destruction. The splash of the metallic object, a dry and final sound, echoed in the vastness of the river. It was not the sound of a stone, but of something more complex, more dangerous. It was a lighter, a small artifact of metal and fire, now submerged, but its lethal potential intact. An instant of agonizing silence hung over the water, a hiatus between intention and consequence. The old woman's heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drum of panic. She held her breath, awaiting the inevitable. The donkey brayed, a muffled, terrified sound, its legs thrashing with renewed desperation, agitating the water and the gasoline. The tiger, however, did not hesitate. Its amber eyes, once vigilant, now burned with a primordial fury. It let out a deep growl, a sound that was not just a warning but a declaration of war against the new threat. With a powerful thrust, it pushed the donkey, trying to move them away from the spreading slick, but it was too late. The lighter, carried by the current and the agitation of the water, found a point of friction, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark, and then, with a whoosh, the river's surface exploded into flames. A tongue of orange and red fire licked the water, rapidly expanding, devouring the gasoline slick with frightening voracity. The heat hit the elderly woman like a punch, making her cough and choke on the acrid smoke that rose. Her eyes burned, and she felt the hair on her forehead crackle. The donkey, in total panic, tried to rear up, but the rope kept it tied to the old woman, a bond of desperation. The river, once an icy embrace, now became a pyre. Fire danced on the waves, creating a macabre spectacle of light and shadow, a liquid hell that approached them with relentless speed. High on the bridge, the daughter watched the scene with a cruel, distorted smile. Her eyes gleamed with maniacal satisfaction, the reflection of the flames dancing in her dilated pupils. She had succeeded. The river would not save them. It would be the fiery tomb she so desired. Her laughter, a sharp sound devoid of any humanity, echoed over the roar of the fire and the desperation of those struggling below. João, the motorcyclist, had reached the SUV. His fingers were already extended for the daughter's cell phone on the passenger seat, but the whoosh of the flames made him freeze. He turned, his eyes wide with horror. The fire. The sight of the flames dancing on the water, surrounding the elderly woman, the donkey, and the tiger, hit him with overwhelming force. The urgency to call the police transformed into a silent scream of despair. He couldn't just call. He needed to do something now. But what? The bridge was high, the river an inferno. The tiger, a force of nature in its element, reacted with surprising ferocity. It did not swim from the fire. It swam against it, using its mass and strength to create a wave, a temporary barrier between them and the flames. With a roar that seemed to defy hell itself, it pushed the donkey with enormous force, guiding it away from the epicenter of the fire. Its movements were precise, each stroke an act of survival, each impulse a promise of protection. It moved like an icebreaker, forging a path through the flaming water, its massive body protecting the elderly woman and the animal from the most intense heat. The elderly woman felt the scalding heat on her back, the smell of smoke filling her lungs. Her strength was ebbing, exhaustion and cold, mixing with the terror of the fire. She coughed, her eyes watering, but she clung to the donkey with what little strength she had left. She trusted the tiger, an irrational, almost mystical trust. It was her only hope, her compass amidst the flaming chaos. The donkey, in its panic, struggled violently, almost throwing the elderly woman into the water. Its legs moved at a frantic but uncoordinated pace, a desperate fight against the element that swallowed and burned it. It brayed, a muffled, agonizing sound that was lost in the roar of the flames. The rope that bound it to the elderly woman, once a symbol of her imprisonment, now was the only connection between them, a fragile link in the aquatic and flaming immensity. The bank was so close, a blur of green and brown that seemed unattainable. But the tiger did not give up. It continued to push, to guide, its muscles tense and powerful. The flames licked the water around them, but the tiger, with its thick hide and unshakable determination, seemed immune to the heat. Or perhaps its fury was stronger than any flame. It was the personification of resilience, a wild guardian who refused to see its charges succumb. João, High on the bridge could wait no longer. With a cry of rage and desperation, he grabbed the daughter's cell phone. His fingers trembled as he dialed the emergency number, his eyes fixed on the infernal scene below. He could hear the daughter's laughter, a sound that made him boil with hatred. He needed help, and he needed it now. The tiger, with one last monumental effort, pushed the donkey out of the most intense fire zone. The bank was just a few meters away. The water, though still cold and dark, seemed like paradise compared to the hell they had just crossed. The elderly woman felt the riverbed beneath the donkey's hooves, an indescribable relief. They were almost there, but the danger had not passed. The daughter, high on the bridge, was still a menacing shadow, and the fire, though receding, was still a vivid reminder of her relentless cruelty. They had escaped the flames, but the hunt was not over. The daughter would not give up, and the river, with its treacherous and now flaming waters, was just the first obstacle in their journey to freedom or to death. The riverbed beneath the donkey's hooves, an indescribable relief. But it was not yet dry land. The water, though shallower, remained cold and dark, licking the old woman's waist. The smell of burned gasoline hung in the air, an acrid reminder of the hell from which they had emerged. The tiger, a silent and powerful presence, continued to guide them, its massive body a shield against the residual heat and the invisible dangers the river might still conceal. Its amber eyes swept the bank, an unshakable vigilance. The elderly woman coughed, her lungs burning, her throat raw. Her skin was taut, her hair singed at the ends. She trembled uncontrollably, a mixture of cold, dread, and exhaustion that consumed her. The donkey, though out of the direct flames, was still in a panic. It brayed, a pained sound, its body shaking. Small burns marked its fur, and the smell of singed mane was nauseating. It struggled to move forward, its movements clumsy, but driven by the primordial instinct of survival. High on the bridge, the daughter's cruel smile wavered for an instant. They had survived the fire. Her plan, so meticulously orchestrated, was failing. A flash of frustration crossed her face, quickly replaced by a renewed and even colder determination. She would not let them escape, not now, not after everything. Her eyes scanned the scene, searching for a new means, a new weapon. João, meanwhile, spoke frantically into the phone. "Yes, it's an emergency. An elderly woman was thrown from the bridge, and her daughter set the river on fire. Yes, fire, near the old bridge, on Highway 101. We need an ambulance, firefighters, police. Quickly, please. She's still up here." His voice was hoarse with urgency, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at the daughter, who was now staring directly at him, a predatory gleam in her eyes. He had become a target. The daughter, seeing João on the phone, knew her time was running out. She couldn't risk being caught there, but she also couldn't leave her mother alive. Her gaze fell upon a large, heavy lug wrench, forgotten near the toolbox she had used earlier. A new, desperate idea formed in her mind. She grabbed the wrench, the cold metal contrasting with the heat of the flames below. With a growl, she turned her attention to the riverbank, where the trio was slowly emerging from the water. They were vulnerable, exposed. She raised the wrench, aiming at the elderly woman, a last brutal attempt to silence her forever. The tiger, sensing the renewed threat from above, let out another guttural growl. It pushed the donkey one last time, urging it towards the muddy bank. The exact moment the old woman's feet touched the soft ground, the lug wrench flew through the air, a dark blur against the grey sky. It was a perfect throw. But João, seeing the daughter's movement, reacted instinctively. There was no time to think. He shouted, a desperate warning, and then, without hesitation, threw himself at the daughter, tackling her just as she released the wrench. The impact sent them rolling across the bridge, the lug wrench missing its target by mere centimeters, falling harmlessly into the water further down the bank. A fierce struggle erupted on the bridge. The daughter, driven by rage and desperation, fought like a wild animal, scratching and kicking. João, though surprised by her strength, held her, trying to restrain her, preventing her from reaching anything else. He knew he couldn't allow her to harm anyone else. He could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing in volume. Help was on its way. Below, on the riverbank, the elderly woman collapsed onto the muddy ground, gasping for air. The trembling donkey stood beside her, its head bowed. The tiger, however, remained alert, its gaze fixed on the bridge, then on the surrounding trees. They were out of the water, out of the fire, but still not safe. The bank was steep, covered in thick, thorny bushes and slippery mud. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and damp earth. The old woman tried to move, to stand up, but her limbs refused to obey. Every muscle ached, every breath was a struggle. She looked at the tiger, her silent savior, a mythical creature come to life. It nudged her gently with its massive head, a gesture of reassurance, and then turned, guiding the donkey deeper into the undergrowth, away from the exposed bank, away from the bridge, away from the persistent threat. João struggled with the daughter, trying to immobilize her. She bit his arm, drawing blood, but he didn't let go. "It's over!" he shouted. "The police are coming!" Her wild, unfocused eyes turned towards the sound of the sirens. Panic, real panic, finally registered on her face. Not for her mother, but for herself. She saw the flashing lights approaching, heard the distinct wail. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, she managed to break free, getting up awkwardly. She didn't look at João, nor at the river. Her only thought was to escape. She ran to her SUV, fumbling for the keys, her movements frantic. João, injured and bleeding, tried to pursue her, but it was too late. She jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine with a roar, and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and the approaching sirens behind. João watched her go, a mix of relief and frustration washing over him. He had prevented another attack, but she had escaped. The sirens grew louder, closer. João turned his attention back to the riverbank. The elderly woman and the donkey, guided by the tiger, had disappeared into the dense vegetation. He knew they needed help, medical attention, but he also knew the tiger wouldn't allow strangers to approach easily. He had to explain everything quickly before the authorities arrived and misinterpreted the situation. The fire on the river was slowly dying, leaving a shimmering, oily residue on the water. The air was thick with smoke. The bridge, once the scene of a horrific crime, was now a scene of chaos and impending investigation. The elderly woman, hidden in the vegetation, felt a wave of dizziness. She was safe from the immediate flames, but the cold, exhaustion, shock, and injuries were taking their toll. The tiger lay beside her, a warm and comforting presence, its soft fur a stark contrast to the harsh reality they had just faced. The trembling donkey leaned against a tree, its breath coming in ragged gasps. They were alive, but their ordeal was far from over. The forest, while offering temporary refuge, was also a new and unknown challenge. They were injured, exposed, and still being hunted. The daughter had left for now, but her shadow loomed menacingly. The next steps were uncertain, but one thing was clear. The bond forged in fire and water between the old woman, the donkey, and the magnificent tiger was unbreakable. The sirens tore through the air, a sharp wail rapidly approaching, transforming the post-chaos silence into a cacophony of urgency. Red and blue lights flashed on the horizon, painting the lingering smoke over the river with a ghostly glow. João, still on the bridge, felt blood trickle from his bitten arm, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the torrent of emotions that overwhelmed him. Rage at the daughter, relief for the mother, and a growing anxiety about how on earth he would explain what had just happened. The first emergency vehicles, a police cruiser, followed by a fire truck and an ambulance, stopped abruptly at the bridge entrance. Doors swung open, and a torrent of uniformed men and women disembarked, their faces displaying a mix of professionalism and shock at the scene. The smell of smoke and burned gasoline was overwhelming, and the river, still with an oily, dark sheen, looked like a mirror of hell. "Sir, what happened here?" shouted a police officer approaching João, who stood swaying in the middle of the bridge. His eyes, however, were fixed on the riverbank, where his mother and the tiger had disappeared. "My mother!" João managed to stammer, his voice hoarse. "My daughter! She threw my mother off the bridge, tied to a donkey, and set the river on fire." The police officer blinked, processing the bizarre information. His eyes swept the bridge, looking for evidence of a struggle, but the story seemed straight out of a nightmare. Other firefighters were already assessing the river, while paramedics prepared for the rescue. "Sir, please, calmly. Where is the victim? And the donkey?" asked another officer, trying to maintain composure. "On the bank! They were saved!" João gestured frantically towards the dense vegetation. "By a tiger! An albino tiger! It pulled them out of the water, out of the fire!" A murmur of disbelief rippled through the officers. A tiger, albino, in a flaming river, saving an elderly woman and a donkey. The story was too absurd to be true, but the scene before them, the burned river, the injured and shocked man, demanded a serious investigation. While João tried, amidst stutters and frustration, to give a coherent account of the events, firefighters had already begun to descend the bank. Equipped with ropes and flashlights, the search for the elderly woman and the donkey began. But the mention of a tiger added a layer of danger and complication no one expected. Far from the commotion on the bridge, in the damp darkness of the riverside forest, the elderly woman felt life draining from her body. Shock, cold, and exhaustion were like a heavy cloak pulling her down. She lay in the mud, under the protection of a thick bush, the donkey beside her, trembling. The tiger, a massive and vigilant shadow, was a few meters away, its amber eyes sweeping the darkness, attentive to every sound, every movement. The forest was a labyrinth of exposed roots, gnarled branches, and dense foliage. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves mingled with the acrid residue of smoke. The elderly woman tried to curl up, seeking warmth, but her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Small wounds burned on her skin, and her throat was dry and sore. She coughed again, a weak, hoarse sound that was lost in the rustling of the leaves. The donkey, though exhausted and wounded, seemed to sense its companion's deterioration. It rubbed its muzzle against the old woman's shoulder, a low groan escaping its throat. It was a sound of comfort and loyalty, a bond that had deepened through the hell they had shared. The tiger approached, its white fur almost invisible in the dense darkness. It sniffed the elderly woman carefully, then nudged her gently with its muzzle, a gesture that seemed to ask if she was all right, if she still had strength. The old woman, with a monumental effort, extended her trembling hand and touched the tiger's massive head. The fur was soft, the warmth of the animal's body a welcome relief. A tear streamed down her dirty face. Meanwhile, the daughter drove at high speed, the SUV cutting through the night. The initial panic had transformed into a cold, calculating fury. They couldn't have survived. It wasn't possible. Her plan was infallible. The image of João on the bridge, calling the police, made her grit her teeth. He had betrayed her. Everyone had betrayed her. She threw her cell phone onto the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the dark road. The sirens, now distant, were a reminder of her failure, but also a catalyst for her next move. She couldn't go home, not now, but she also couldn't just disappear. There was an old, isolated cabin deep in the forest that belonged to the family, a place where she could hide, regroup, and perhaps plan her next step. Her mother was still alive. That was unacceptable. On the riverbank, firefighters and police advanced cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, revealing the slippery mud and dense vegetation. The smell of smoke was still strong, and the river looked like a black abyss. They called out for the elderly woman, but only the echo of their voices responded. The mention of a tiger kept them on alert, every shadow seeming to hide a threat. João, accompanied by a paramedic who was trying to assess his arm, insisted, "They're around here. The tiger won't let anyone get close easily, but it saved them. It's her protector." The paramedic nodded, but his eyes showed doubt. A savior tiger. It was a story to tell grandchildren, not for a police report. In the forest, the tiger heard the approaching sounds, the distant growls of search dogs, human shouts, the rustling of vegetation. It knew they were a threat. Its mission was to protect. It nudged the elderly woman again, with more urgency this time. She needed to move. They needed to go deeper, to a place where humans couldn't find them. With an agonizing effort, the elderly woman tried to drag herself, but her body was heavy, her muscles failing. The donkey, sensing the tiger's urgency, tried to help her, gently pushing her with its head. The tiger, seeing her difficulty, did the unthinkable. It lowered itself, offering its broad, strong back. It was a silent invitation, a promise of safety. The elderly woman looked at the tiger, then at the donkey. She had no choice. With the help of the donkey and a willpower that seemed to come from a distant place, she managed to hoist herself with difficulty onto the tiger's back. It was a surreal sight. The old woman, injured and exhausted, riding an albino tiger, the donkey following closely. The tiger rose with surprising grace considering the weight. Its powerful muscles rippled beneath its soft fur. It turned not towards the bridge, but towards the depths of the forest, into the unknown, away from the approaching humans, away from the daughter who still hunted them. The journey was far from over. The forest was vast, dark, and full of dangers. But with the tiger as their guide, there was a spark of hope. They were fleeing, but they were also together, an improbable family forged in fire and water, now facing the darkness of night and relentless pursuit. The forest swallowed the old woman, the donkey, and the tiger, transforming them into mere shadows in a labyrinth of darkness and danger. The rustling of leaves beneath the tiger's paws was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence, a steady rhythm marking their desperate escape. The elderly woman, riding her feline savior, felt every jolt, every movement of the muscular body beneath her. Pain was a constant companion, a pulsating echo in her wounds, but exhaustion was even crueler, pulling her into the depths of a dreamless sleep. The tiger, with its precious cargo, moved with surprising agility, dodging exposed roots and low branches. Its amber eyes, accustomed to the gloom, guided it through the dense vegetation, each step calculated, each breath controlled. It sensed the old woman's weakness, the tremor in her body, her shallow breathing. Its mission of protection became more urgent with every meter covered. The donkey, faithful and exhausted, followed closely, its muzzle almost touching the tiger's tail, its own wounds burning but its loyalty unshakable. Far away on the bridge, the cacophony of sirens and human voices intensified. João, his arm bandaged, desperately tried to convince the officers that his mother was alive, saved by a feline miracle. But the story, however true, sounded like delirium. An albino tiger. "Sir, with all due respect, you're in shock," said a police officer, his voice laden with skepticism. Firefighters, equipped with powerful flashlights, swept the riverbank, but the forest's darkness was impenetrable, and the slippery mud hindered their progress. They called out, their shouts echoing into the night, but only the silence of the woods responded. Meanwhile, the daughter, driven by a cold and calculating fury, arrived at the isolated cabin. The property's faint lights barely illuminated the aged facade. She swerved the car in, the tire squealing on the dirt track. The cabin, a childhood refuge, now became a lair for her dark plans. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty, forgotten interior. But the daughter didn't care about the grime. Her eyes swept the room, searching for something specific. She opened an old cabinet, revealing a hunting shotgun, rusty but still functional. The weapon in her hands was a symbol of her desperation and her murderous determination. Her mother could not have survived, not after everything she had done. Back in the forest, the elderly woman felt a chill run through her body. Fever began to set in, mixing with the damp cold of the night. She coughed again, a harsh sound that seemed to tear her throat. The tiger, noticing her worsening condition, stopped. Its eyes scanned the darkness, seeking shelter. It sniffed the air, its whiskers vibrating, catching the scent of a small, rocky recess, hidden by a curtain of vines. With a low growl, it headed there. The spot was tight, but offered some protection from the wind and dampness. The tiger lowered itself, allowing the elderly woman to slide off its back. She fell onto the damp earth, her body trembling uncontrollably. The donkey squeezed in beside her, offering its warmth. The tiger lay down in front, its massive body blocking the entrance, its eyes fixed on the darkness, a wall of flesh and muscle between them and the outside world. The elderly woman closed her eyes, her mind wandering. Images of her daughter, her husband, of a life that seemed so distant, danced in her feverish mind. She felt the tiger's rough tongue gently lick her hand, a gesture of affection that brought her back to reality for a brief moment. She was dying, she knew, but she was not alone. Meanwhile, the search team on the riverbank began to lose hope. "There are no clear tracks, Captain. The vegetation is too dense, and the river is too turbulent," reported a firefighter. João, however, did not give up. "I know they're here. The tiger is protecting them. Please don't stop." His voice, choked with emotion, was a desperate plea, but logic and protocol dictated that without concrete evidence, the search would become unfeasible in the darkness of night. The daughter, in the cabin, loaded the shotgun. The metallic click of the mechanism was a grim premonition. She knew the police would be looking for her, but she also knew that her mother, if alive, would be the greatest threat to her freedom. She needed to finish what she started. With an old map of the region in hand, she plotted an alternative route, a less obvious path that would take her to the riverbank, further downstream, where she hoped to intercept her prey. The night was her ally and the forest her hunting ground. In the rocky shelter, the tiger heard. It wasn't the distant shouts of the search team, nor the rustling of nocturnal animals. It was a different sound, more subtle, more menacing. The smell of old gunpowder and the human scent, but not João's. It was her scent. The daughter was approaching. The tiger rose, its muscles tense, a low, guttural growl escaping its throat. The elderly woman opened her eyes, feeling the change in the atmosphere, the imminent danger. She looked at the tiger, her tired eyes meeting its own. A silent understanding passed between them. The fight for survival was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and the predator hunting them was far more dangerous than any animal in the forest. The elderly woman, with a final effort, clutched the tiger's fur. She couldn't move, but she could hold on. The donkey pushed her again, as if to say, "We're in this together." The tiger, sensing the ever-nearing threat, knew they couldn't stay there. It needed to take them to an even safer place, deeper into the forest, where the daughter couldn't find them. But time was running out. The hunt had transformed into a race against death, and the forest, once a refuge, now seemed like a stage for the final confrontation. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with the promise of violence. The tiger, the donkey, and the old woman, an improbable trio, stood on the edge of a precipice, with the daughter, armed and relentless, approaching. The night held its secrets, but not for long. The daughter moved like a shadow, her steps calculated, the shotgun in hand. The clearing opened before her, and the sight of the hollow oak, with the albino tiger lying in front of it, made a cruel smile spread across her lips. There they were, cornered. Her eyes gleamed with icy satisfaction. There was no escape now. She raised the shotgun, aiming at the massive body of the feline. But the tiger, with its keen senses, had already perceived her presence. A louder, guttural growl escaped its throat, a warning that reverberated through the clearing. The elderly woman inside the trunk opened her eyes, feeling the chill of imminent danger. The donkey brayed, pushing her further into the shelter. The first shot tore through the night's silence. The bang echoed, and the bullet whizzed, grazing the tiger's fur, which moved with surprising speed. It did not flee, it advanced. With a roar that made the forest tremble, the tiger lunged at the daughter. She tried to reload, but it was too late. The massive body of the feline hit her squarely, knocking her to the ground. The shotgun flew from her hands, landing far away. The daughter screamed, not in pain, but in fury and frustration. She tried to get up, but the tiger immobilized her with a paw, its sharp claws dangerously close to her neck, its amber eyes fixed on hers, a silent but deadly warning. At that exact moment, a desperate shout tore through the darkness. "Mother! Tiger!" It was João. He had heard the shot and run, driven by insane hope and overwhelming fear. He burst into the clearing, the flashlight in his hand swinging wildly, illuminating the surreal scene, his sister immobilized by the tiger and the hollow oak. The daughter, seeing João, tried to break free, but the tiger tightened its paw, a low, menacing growl. João, in shock, saw his mother's face emerge from the hollow trunk, pale and fragile but alive, and the donkey, faithful by her side. "Stop! Don't hurt her!" João shouted at the tiger, though he knew it was useless. He ran towards his sister, but the tiger warned him with an even louder roar. The feline was not attacking to kill, but to protect. It was defending its territory, its improbable family. Suddenly, the sound of distant sirens began to approach, breaking the quiet of the forest. The shot had been heard, and the small guard on the riverbank had acted. The light of flashlights and headlights began to dance among the trees, getting closer and closer. The daughter, seeing the police approach, realized her plan had failed miserably. An expression of desperation and hatred settled on her face. The tiger, sensing the change in the atmosphere, the end of the immediate threat, released her, but remained between her and the oak, a living barrier. The first police officers and firefighters arrived at the clearing, their weapons drawn, shocked by the scene unfolding. A woman on the ground, a man shouting, and a majestic albino tiger guarding a hollow tree from which an elderly woman and a donkey watched. It was an image that defied all logic. "Mother, you're alive!" João ran to the oak, embracing his mother with a relief that made him cry. Paramedics rushed to attend to her, while the daughter was handcuffed, offering no resistance, her eyes empty of any emotion except a cold resignation. The tiger, seeing its mission accomplished, gave one last look at the elderly woman, a look of understanding and farewell. It turned, and with the same agility with which it had appeared, disappeared into the darkness of the forest, a white shadow merging with the night. The donkey, after ensuring the old woman was safe, let out a soft bray, almost a lament, and also moved away, following the tiger's trail. The elderly woman was rushed to the hospital, her life hanging by a thread, but with renewed strength in her gaze. She had survived, thanks to a wild animal, a stubborn donkey, and an unconditional love. In the days that followed, the story of the albino tiger and the elderly woman spread like a myth. The daughter faced the consequences of her actions, and justice, finally, would be served. João never again doubted the ability of love and loyalty to transcend the barriers of species. The forest, silent witness to so much pain and so many miracles, kept its secrets. But for the elderly woman, the sound of the tiger's roar and the warmth of the donkey's body would forever be the melody of her second chance. She had been pushed to death, but life, in its wildest and purest form, had rescued her. And, in her heart, she knew that, somewhere in the green immensity, her white guardian still watched over her. Life, after all, was a miracle, and hope, a flame that not even the deepest darkness could extinguish.